Genesis 37. Jacob lived in the land where his father had sojourned, in the land of Canaan. These are the records of the generations of Jacob. Jacob had two wives, Rachel and Leah. He had children by both of those, and he had children by their maids as well. And so he had a total of 12 sons. Jacob did. That's where you get the name, the children of Israel. Jacob's name was changed to Israel, so the children of Israel. And Joseph was one of these children by Rachel. His mother was Rachel. And there's a lot of story, a lot of good information, interesting facts and history that you can read in the chapters preceding chapter 37. But today we're going to pick up with Joseph. So continuing in verse 2, these are the records of the generations of Jacob. And then it jumps right into Joseph. Joseph was, 17. Joseph, when 17 years of age. Anybody in here 17 years of age anymore? Okay, who in here wants to be 17? All right, okay. I knew some young hands were going up, but I saw old hands going up. I don't know if I want to go back to 17, y'all. All right, maybe 45, 35, but not 17. All right, I had to learn too much, and I had too many hard knocks. At University of Hard Knocks we mentioned last week, well, I don't want to go through all that again. If I went through back to 17, I'd have too much to learn and had to be slapped around too many times to get the things into me that need to be taught to me. Joseph, when 17 years of age, was pasturing the flock with his brothers while he was still a youth. 17 is still considered a youth. It says so right here in the Bible. Along with the sons of Bilhah, there's one of those maids, and the sons of Zilpah, there's the other one, his father's wives. And Joseph brought back a bad report about them to his father. Now, let's skip on down to verse number 4. His brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers. All right, Joseph was his daddy's pick. I've seen parents have a favorite son or a daughter or a favorite child. I couldn't be that way with mine coming up. I love them all. I mean, they're all different, but I love them equally. And some of you maybe have a favorite, I don't know, but this is just the fact that his dad loved him more than the others, and it was obvious. And guess what they did about it? It said, so they hated him and could not speak to him on friendly terms. They were jealous. All right? They were jealous and they hated him and could not speak to him on friendly terms. So there's problem number one. He had family problems. Y'all ever had family problems before? Right? He had a family problem. Him and his brothers didn't get along. They hated him. There's been times me and my brothers and sisters didn't get along, but I don't know that I've ever felt hated. But these guys, oh boy, let's see what else happened. Not only did they hate him, there was a time that they did something to Joseph that they shouldn't have done. Let's skip on to verse number 12. All right, his brothers went to pasture their father's flock in Shechem. Let's read down to about 17. So Israel, Daddy said to Joseph, are not your brothers pasturing the flock in Shechem? Come, and I will send you to them. And he said to him, I will go. Then he said to him, go now and see about the welfare of your brothers. See, he loved them other boys too. He just loved Joseph more. He wanted to check on them. And the welfare of the flock, and bring back word to me. So he sent him from the valley of Hebron, and he came to Shechem. Well, he was there. He got to Shechem, looked around. He didn't see nobody. He thought, what in the world's going on? So he pulled out a moon pie and a RC cola, was drinking and standing around, and this man comes up and said, what you doing? What you looking for? So I'm looking for my brothers. They were down here with a bunch of sheep. He said, oh, they left here and went to Dothan, Alabama, right? Well, I don't know if it was Dothan, Alabama. We doubt it was, but let's look down and see as he goes down and he finds on verse 17. So Joseph went after his brothers and found them at Dothan. So he finds them there. Verse 18, when they saw him from a distance, there he comes. Here comes that old sorry Joseph. Look at him. There he comes. They saw him at a distance before he came close to them. They plotted against him to put him to death. They didn't like him too much, did they? They wanted to kill him. That wasn't very nice. They weren't loving brothers at all. They said to one another, here comes this dreamer. Now then, come and let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits. One of the pits, that's a deep hole in the ground. I don't know why the pit was there. I don't know if it was just an erosion or if it was a dug well that before submersible pumps and jet pumps and all that, electricity became available. You had to dig a hole in the ground for your water back in those days in a lot of places. So this might have been one of those. So they said, let's kill him, throw him into one of these holes, and we'll say a wild beast devoured him. Then let us see what happens to this boy in his dreams. He's been predicting things that's going to happen. Now let's see what's going to happen if we kill him and throw him in one of these holes. But, verse 21, Reuben, I think he was the oldest one, he heard all this talk going on, and he rescued him out of their hands and said, now come on, we're not fixing to kill him. We're not fixing to take his life. Verse 22, Reuben further said to them, shed no blood. Go ahead and throw him in a pit that's in the wilderness, but you ain't going to hurt him. You ain't going to do anything to him. And he did all that, saying, in his mind he's thinking, I'll let him throw him in his pit. Later on, I'll rescue him. Let him go on and throw him in the pit. And later on, I'll come get him out and carry him back to daddy. Verse 23, so it came about when Joseph reached his brothers that they stripped Joseph of his tunic, his varicolored tunic, his piece of clothing that his dad had made him, and they didn't get one, and this was a special made one. They took that thing, verse 24, and they took him, threw him into this pit, this deep hole in the ground. Now the pit was empty, without any water in it. So there he is. Can you imagine what was going through this 17-year-old boy's mind? I'd have been thinking, Lord have mercy. I'd probably be more mad that they threw me in the hole than that I was in a hole at that point. And then after after probably an hour or two, start thinking, well, I don't know. Did they leave me right here? Am I just going to stay here? Or is somebody going to come along and find me out here? He probably did some praying. And I'd been thinking, okay, what am I going to have to do to get out of here? I'm going to look around, and first of all, the first thing I'd have done was I'd hope there's no snakes in this pit. I'd be looking around to see if there's water moccasins or rattlers or whatever down in there, and I'd try to take care of that first. Next, I'd try to figure out a way to get out of there. Seeing if I could climb up, find some roots to grab a hold of or something, and he probably did all those things, and I'd be thinking, now, what if I got to go to the bathroom? Where am I going to go? I'm right here, So I'm stuck. Are they going to leave me in here forever? Am I going to have to sleep in here? What? Anyway, so that's his first problem, was he had family problems. The second problem, now he's in a hole he can't get out of. All because of family problems. All right? Started with family problems. Now he's got a different problem. He's trapped. But let's see what happens next. Verse 25. They threw him in that hole and they just went off, let's go have some lunch. They sat down to eat a meal, and as they raised their eyes and looked, behold, a caravan of Ishmaelites was coming from Gilead with their camels bearing aromatic gum and balm and myrrh, and on their way to bring them down to Egypt. I guess they were salesmen. So Judah, one of the brothers, said, listen, what profit is it for us? It ain't gonna help us none by killing our brother, covering us with blood. So, verse 27, come, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him. After all, he is our brother. He is our own flesh. And his brothers listened to him. Then, verse 28, some Midianite traders passed by, and they pulled him up and lifted Joseph out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. They sold him for 20 shekels of silver. Now, he was now sold as merchandise, the property of somebody else. And probably the one that bought him had no intentions of keeping him, but rather making a profit off of him. So the wholesale price on a 17-year-old boy as a slave in those days was 20 shekels of silver. Now, they probably had in mind, we can probably get, 40 or more out of him, somebody may need somebody to cut their grass for them. Somebody may need somebody to hold the cotton for them or sweep off the sidewalks or clean the outside of the house or whatever else. Pull weeds out of the garden or whatever. So they bought him, no doubt with the intentions of selling him again, so that's exactly what they did. That says in the end of 28, thus they brought Joseph into Egypt. All right, so he's gone. He's out of the pit, he's gone. Reuben comes back. He returns, he's going to look in that pit when nobody's around, he's going to pull him out and carry him on home. But guess what? He looks in there, Joseph is gone. So he tore his garments. Verse 30, he returned to his brothers and said, the boy is not there. As for me, where am I to go? So they took Joseph's tunic, slaughtered a male goat, dipped it in blood, and they basically carried it home and they showed it to Daddy and said, look, is this not Joseph's garment that you made? Here it is. And so Jacob jumped to the conclusion, verse 34, so Jacob tore his clothes and put sackcloth on his loin and mourned for many days. But back to 33. He exclaimed, yes, this is his clothes. A wild beast must have devoured him. Joseph has surely been torn to pieces. So his daddy thought he was dead. And his brothers were happy that he was having that story and that belief, and they didn't tell him any different. And for years and years, Daddy thought he was dead and gone. But in the meantime, guess what? He sold his merchandise, and he gets down, verse 36. Meanwhile, the Midianites sold him in Egypt to Potiphar, Pharaoh's officer. Pharaoh was the king. So Potiphar was probably a rich leader, assistant to the king, his officer, the captain of the bodyguard, and he had some extra change, and maybe he needed some help, and he bought Joseph as a slave. So he's had some problems. Anybody here got some problems today? Joseph had family problems. Joseph was thrown into a pit. You could say he had a pitiful problem. And he was sold as merchandise, sold again as a slave. Now he's sold as a slave. But guess what? I'm going to skip down. Not only was he sold as a slave, he got into another problem before he got any of these totally fixed. He got thrown into prison. Look at verse 19, the next chapter. Chapter 38, it is 39. Skip chapter 38 goes into all of Esau's descendants. 39 picks up with the story. Chapter 39, and if you look at verse 19, Pharaoh had this assistant named Potiphar that bought Joseph, this officer. This officer had a wife that had a desire for Joseph. And he kept putting her off, kept saying no, and finally she accused him of trying to rape her. You can read that story in the verses between. And so when Potiphar got home and heard this, that his wife telling this man that you brought in here, this slave tried to do things with me he shouldn't do. And so as a result, verse 18, chapter 39, when his master heard the word which she spoke to him, saying, this is what your slave did to me, his anger burned. That means he was pretty mad. So Joseph's master took him and put him into the jail, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. So jail, prisoners are there. I guess you could say same thing as prison. A jail and prison is pretty much the same thing, just it's smaller. And most of the people there are there for a shorter duration, a shorter sentence than those in prison. So not much difference. You could say he's in prison. Now he's got another problem, see? He's got a problem. Anybody here got a problem? Anybody here feel like you trapped and got a situation you can't get yourself out of? Well, that's Joseph. Sold as a merchant, sold again as a slave, and now he's placed in jail. Well, we see his problems. Now, I want you to see something else about Joseph while he's in his problems. I want you to see Joseph's companion. He had a companion. Look back at chapter 39, verse number 2. This was right after he'd been bought by Potiphar. Verse number 2 of chapter 39, the Lord was with Joseph. He had a problem he couldn't shake himself free from. The Lord was with Joseph, and look what it says next. So he became a successful man. The Lord was with Joseph. Joseph had a companion in this problem. And it says it again in the next verse. It says that the Lord was with him. See, he had a companion. And guess what? While he was in prison, we see this same phrase. Chapter 39, verse number 20. After they threw him in jail. Actually, verse 21. They threw him in jail. He was there in jail. Verse 20, verse 21. But the Lord was with Joseph. And another time, it says while he was there, that the Lord was with him. So, he had a companion. He had the Lord there with him. So I would ask you right now, if you've got a problem, you got something you're having difficulty with, let me just ask you, do you have the same companion that Joseph had? The Lord was with him. That's the first thing that any of us, if there's a problem going on, we need to check, If we out in the woods, we're hunting, it starts getting dark, I'm going to start looking, see if I got my little light, I used to keep one of them little lights in my pocket or my headlamp that I can wear. And I guess if you're out hiking on the Appalachian Trail, which I've done in the wintertime, you want to make sure you got something to start a fire with in case you get cold. I've learned to carry Sterno cans with me. That's the best instant heat is a can of Sterno. It's lightweight. Can of Sterno would burn about 4 hours. And I've learned in those little bitty pup-type tents, when it gets to be 17 degrees and it's really cold, you can flip that top off and get you something to strike a fire with, and you can light that stuff. It'll heat up a tent to room temperature, a good room temperature of 75, 78 degrees pretty fast. So you want to make sure you've got certain things, and when you get in a problem, you want to make sure you've got the companion that Joseph had. The Lord was with him. That's going to be so important in this story. Why is that important? Because he got some help. Joseph had a problem. He had several problems. Joseph had a companion. Now let's look and see Joseph got some help. Let's look back while he was a slave for Mr. Potiphar. I'm just going to read these verses. I've got them marked. I'm going to read portions of these verses. In chapter 39, verse 2, the second part, the Lord was with him, and it says, so he became a successful man. He became successful in the things he was doing. And also in that same verse, and it says, the word and, not only was he successful, he was in the house. You say, why is that important? Well, as a slave, he could have been living outside under a boat or something. Just an old slave, he could stay outside. A slave in those days for a lot of people was nothing much more between, they existed somewhere between the appreciation of an animal and another human being, kind of in the middle. He could have been in a bunkhouse. He could have been having to stay in the barn, as what normally slaves wouldn't be able to do what he did. He was in the house, and I imagine this house was a mansion in those days. Why? Because the Lord was with him. See? And if the Lord is with you in your problem, you're going to have some help. You're going to have all the help you need. And while you're waiting for God to do all that you want, He's going to help you during that process. And Joseph was a successful man. He was in the house, which was quite like a mansion probably. But not only that, verse 3, it says, the Lord caused all that he did to prosper. Everything he did, everything he wanted to try to please his master, it worked. I think this is a good place to put them watermelons. Y'all never planted any here before, but I'm telling you, this looks like a good spot. Threw the seed in the ground, it came up. Usually they get 3 or 4, they get 20 or 30. Stuff like that. He just had ideas, he would try, and God would prosper all those things. Now, I didn't say anything about watermelons. I'm stretching it, but I'm trying to get the point across here. All that he did prospered because God was with him. What else? Verse 4. Joseph found favor in the sight of his master. He found favor. That means his master liked him. I like this slave. This is a good man right here. I like it. He's special. He got special treatment. If you've got favor, you've got special treatment. He became, verse 4, here's another blessing. He became his personal servant. Didn't say slave, see? Now he's elevated. Now he's servant. Yes, he's still a slave. He's still not got his freedom. And then we see in verse 5, he's made overseer. Oh, he's got some ranking now. He's got some political or some authority. That word of overseer, he's got some authority. He had authority in his home, in his house, and over all that Potiphar owned, he had the authority. He got to call all the shots with all the workers and what happened. And I guess with everything that went on, anything came on that property, left that property, it went through Joseph's hand. Why? Because the Lord was with him, and the Lord was blessing him in the midst of a bad problem. Is the Lord your companion? Well, God didn't stop there. Verse 35, it also says in verse 5 that the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house on account of Joseph. He blessed his house. Let's make some application here. Joseph was a blessed man even though he had problems. God can bless you in the midst of your problems. People prevented his freedom, but they could not prevent his companionship. People prevented his freedom, but they couldn't prevent him from being blessed by God. The Lord was helping Joseph in his problems before delivering him from his problems. We just want to get out, don't we? We just want to get on out. God had other purposes. He had other plans. We just saw that while he was a slave of Potiphar, he was also helped by God while a slave. He was also helped as a prisoner. How did that happen? Because the Lord was with him. We saw in verse 20, he's thrown into prison. Verse 21 says, but the Lord. When problems come your way, if God is your companion, then it can be wrote about you, but the Lord. It don't just end because there's a problem. If God's your companion, he's helped again in jail because the Lord's with him. And not only is he helped in there, but way he's helped, he's extended kindness. God extended kindness to him while he was in jail. How did God do that? He did it through the chief jailer. We see in verse 21 that God gave him favor in the sight of the jailer. That was God's doing. God can change people. He can change their hearts. He can change their mind. He can cause those that ought to hate you to love you. That's what happened right here. That jailer probably saw, well, here's another criminal coming in here. I would think that those people jumped to the conclusion after hearing conversations by some of the prison guards, they're all guilty of something or they wouldn't be here. And that may be true, may not be. In Joseph's case, it was not. Didn't make any difference. God was with him. God gave him favor in the sight of the jailer and the one in charge. And this jailer put him in charge of all the rest of the prisoners. He trusted him. Also in verse 22, he put him in charge of everything that went on in that prison. Verse 23, the chief jailer didn't do anything after he put Joseph in charge. He didn't do anything. He just propped his feet up and let Joseph take care and run things. So, I guess Joseph got to use his slim phone if he wanted to. Got to use his cell phone if he wanted to. He's still in the cell. He's still in, but he's got freedoms that everybody else don't have. He's running things. He's got authority again. How did all that happen? The Lord was with him. And whatever he did, verse 23, the Lord made to prosper. Let's make another application. With his problems, Joseph's problems, they came from other people. He didn't do this to himself. He didn't do anything really that brought this on himself. His problems just came. Anybody ever had a problem that it just appeared you wasn't looking for it, but boy, here it comes. Now I got a problem. But his problems came from others, but although he was receiving mistreatment, he was experiencing God treatment in the midst of mistreatment. Because the Lord was with him, right? Pretty important thing when you have a problem that you've got God as your companion, that he's with you. What is your problem this morning? Do you have one? The best chance of your receiving help from God is for you first to have God with you. This message next Sunday in part 2. And we're going to see some things, but let me just go ahead and say a verse that ties in with why God was with Joseph, I believe, and that's in 2 Chronicles 15:2. It says this, the Lord is with you when you are with him. And if you seek him, he will let you find him. But if you abandon him, he will abandon you. The Lord was with Joseph. The Lord can be with you if you've got a problem. If you know Jesus, guess what it says? And if you know Jesus, Galatians 2 verse 20 says, Christ lives in me. That whole verse says, I am crucified with Christ. Nevertheless I live, yet not I, but Christ lives in me. So as a believer, if I'm in a problem, I've got companionship right here on the inside of me. In Matthew 28, verse 20, that same Jesus that lives in me, he said in verse 20, he said, lo, I am with you always. He's not going to leave you. No doubt Joseph wanted freedom from his problems. He wanted deliverance, yet his delay was a time filled with blessings and totally under the control of God. Next week, we're going to look more at this story. We're going to look at Joseph, and we're going to look more at God's delay and deliverance and what that meant. And for him, it meant God was up to something. Anytime there's a delay, listen, God is up to something. Don't miss out. Just make sure you've got God as your companion. Let's stand together in prayer.